I'm Carys.
And I'm Fatima Ibrahim.
We're on a mission to make sense of the news by asking why the media obsesses about some stories, completely ignores others, and how hot is too hot to work.
This is Over the Top, Under the Radar.
My co-host this week is the brilliant Fatima Ibrahim. She's a climate activist, social justice campaigner, and runs the phenomenal Green New Deal Rising. Welcome.
Hey, Carys. Good to see you.
Tell people who don't know about Green New Deal Rising, like what it does and like how you got involved.
So we're a youth climate justice movement organizing young people up and down the country around essentially the idea that we can tackle the climate crisis while also tackling inequality and social injustice, that the current economic settlement is plundering both people and planet, and that there is a better way.
Ooh, I love it. Optimistic. And you do lots of cool organizing around the UK.
Yeah, we just did a bunch of stuff around the local elections. So we engage in electoralism, we're political, but we also challenge politicians. So one of the things that we're most known for is our MP Challenge program, where we disrupt fundraisers or find MPs on the street and kind of doorstep them. And so those are always exciting, and people might have seen some of our clips. The biggest one that we did was Priti Patel's fundraiser, and we challenged her on the hostile environment. That's one worth searching.
Ooh, love it. We'll put it in the show notes so people can see. Okay, well, Fatima and I have both taken a look at the news agenda, and we've picked one story we think the media has gone over the top on, and one we think has flown under the radar and not been talked about enough. And Fatima, I'd love you to start us off with your over the top.
So my over the top won't come as a surprise. It's about the by-election and all of the psychodrama around it.
There's a by-election.
If you haven't heard, definitely living under a rock.
So for the rock people listening, there is going to be a by-election in Makerfield, which is in the kind of like Wigan area in the northwest. A Labour MP has stepped down. It's so that Andy Burnham, a former Labour MP and current mayor of Greater Manchester, can enter Parliament. So that is the by-election that everyone is talking about. Why are you over it?
And that's the context, right? It's not just a by-election. By-elections are always overreported, but this is essentially an election that might define who leads this country. If Andy Burnham wins, he is likely then to become the prime minister and win a Labour leadership election. The reason I'm over it is that it essentially becomes a kind of psychodrama of briefing and, will he win? Won't he win? Who's stepped down? What does that mean? What has been offered? And I think the thing that is kind of scary is that we move incredibly quickly from, is there a potential for a new government, to a lame duck government? And all the while in the background, there's a state actually trying to deliver. And that's not to say that I think this government is doing a good job. But what has happened is, like, we're now looking at potentially 6 prime ministers in the space of a short few years. And the byproduct of that is people lose hope in politics and the ability for government to deliver. We're constantly in a period of transition. And that's kind of why I'm over it. And I think a lot of people are over it. We're just like, we want a government to deliver.
I feel like it's kind of the culmination of a few weeks of a real media frenzy that has set in since the local election results. I think at this point, the media and especially the lobby can become like the kids with the popcorn around a fight, like being like egging things on. And I think we've seen that a few, again, for those living under a rock, we had some local election results. They were quite bad. That led to frenzied speculation about the prime minister, and lots of Labour politicians resigned or said, we don't think Keir Starmer should be prime minister. But I do think like the Wes Streeting is a great example of where the media were like, we hear that Wes is going to resign and Wes is going to do this. And we get like days of speculation, and then Wes is going to launch a leadership challenge, and like 2 sources say, and you're like, who are these sources? And why? A lot of anonymous briefing, a lot of hype. And then like everything has to be melodramatic. I mean, I think it will have implications for the Labour Party because, as you say, it's sort of Andy Burnham's audition for the top job. But it's also a really big deal because Reform is the main opposition candidate and they just won all the available council seats. It's definitely a Reform target, we would assume, for the next general election. So I guess it's also like another kind of playing out of this national story about Reform, whether they're going to be a government. But you're right, there's a lot of frenzied speculation. And in the meanwhile, Keir Starmer actually is still the Prime Minister. Rachel Reeves is still the Chancellor. Even if Andy Burnham gets into Parliament, which I hope he does. I hope he beats reform. Whatever happens next, we're still looking at like several months while the current government
Absolutely.
are the government. And the
Yeah,
only actual person, like to basically a couple of ministers have resigned and lost their jobs. There are new ministers in their place. But other than that, like same people, right? Same home secretary, same
absolutely.
prime minister, same chancellor. So yeah, we're sort of talking about a reality that doesn't exist yet.
Absolutely. While lots of people up and down the country are hurting, right? And actually require a government that like makes interventions to make their life better. I think you're right to say it's a scary prospect if reform were to win that seat. And that's why this by-election is important. It's a bit of a test. If Andy Burnham can't beat reform, does the Labour Party have an answer and have any chance of beating reform come the general election? But something that happened that I feel like had sort of was underreported as a result was the King's speech after the local elections, right? Which
Say
is the
more.
government setting out its agenda for the next year. And there was a lot of significant things in there. But because Westminster and the Westminster lobby is so interested in the briefing wars and the kind of reality show of it all, there's people sat at home thinking like, I need help and I need this government to do something. The government is laying out an agenda and that's not really breaking through.
Really good point. Could you name some things in the King's speech?
Yeah.
Like,
So
I
there
don't think I could.
yeah, I mean, there were a few important things. So reforms to protect social housing stock and restricting the right to buy so that we get more council homes and social housing homes. Leasehold reform to, move towards common hold ownership and get rid of that kind of extractive third party ownership where people are sort of not have freehold over their homes. Restructuring of the NHS, renters protection, including ending no fault evictions, energy market reform aimed at lowering electricity bills and making sure that we're decoupling gas from the energy prices that we're paying, legislating on ending North Sea oil. Like these are big things that the government did promise to do and is putting into their plan for the next year. Yes, some of it is like not large enough, it's not acting in the speed and scale that we need, but it is a government laying out a plan for what it means to deliver. And the fact that that is not breaking through is problematic.
Yeah, and I think, people who are into speculating on this will probably say, well, how much of this is going to happen because Keir Starmer won't be here. But the truth is, unless something huge changes, it will still be a Labour government in 3 months' time, whoever is leading it. Andy Burnham has said he's going to keep the fiscal rules. He's not going to do anything dramatic on Brexit. I think it will have a huge impact who leads the Labour Party. I think that it is hard to see Labour winning next time with Keir Starmer leading the party because I just think people have switched off to what he has to say. Do we think that Andy Burnham or Wes Streeting is suddenly going to get rid of renters' protections? Like, is that a real, like, it's almost we over egg how much is going to change when so much of the mechanics and the business of government is like already in hand. And presumably a lot of it is stuff that like other people in the Labour Party support. That's why they're in the Labour Party.
Absolutely. And I think the thing I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks is the problems are the same, no matter who's leading the country. I haven't heard a convincing alternative, at least from Andy Burnham or any of the candidates, on what they would substantively do differently for the biggest challenge facing this government, which is like, where do you generate the money needed to rehabilitate the economy, to provide support to people, to ensure that we are creating a thriving economy with good jobs? And Andy Burnham, at least in a by-election, is still in that triangulation mode, right? He's technically contesting the Makerfield constituency, and he needs to speak to that constituency, which right now is very reform-leaning. But at the same time, he is standing against the government and the government's record of delivery. And I think that then means you get an Andy Burnham that it's not quite clear what he is saying and who he's speaking to at any given moment. So a few months ago, he was very much, EU, we need stronger relationships with the EU. He's kind of backtracking on that. He's talking about change, but now has recently said that he wouldn't change the fiscal rules. And so I think Zach Palance has said this, and I agree with him, is like, which Andy Burnham are we getting on any given day?
I think that's a really interesting one because I think to take the fiscal rules, for example, there's also a way in which like the Westminster establishment and political journalists like try to fence people in. So Andy Burnham is not the leader of the Labour Party. He is not the MP for Makerfield. Right now, he's the
Mm.
mayor of Greater Manchester and he
Yeah.
has the powers that the mayor of Greater Manchester has. But as soon as his name and other people's name have been floated, we start to get these stories and questions. And if anyone has watched a political show in the last few weeks, you probably will have had a journalist be like, well, what about the bond markets? And there'd be, stories of like, well, if Andy Burnham became prime minister, then the bond markets would have a fit because the bond markets are kind of sentient human beings in this scenario. I don't think most people that voted Labour in 2024 could tell you what the fiscal rules were. And I don't think you can ignore the bond markets or market reaction. We all saw what happened with Liz Truss. But I do think there's a kind of establishment push to be like, well, you have to paint within these lines.
I think it's just another example of the Westminster sort of bubble lobby media class not reflecting actually the views of the majority, but actually trying to force the views of the majority, right? And so it's not that the media is reflecting us, it's the media is trying to tell us what to think. And so then you have, even like this week, Wes coming out about, we need to reconsider our relationship with the EU. We need to potentially rejoin the EU. And then Burnham coming. I'm like, where is this conversation coming from? I don't think anybody in Makerfield or the country is talking about Brexit or the EU.
I mean, the thing that people care about overwhelmingly, if you believe opinion polls, which, are a decent measure of what people think, is the cost of living.
It's the same thing they cared about 10 years ago, Karis, when they voted, is they just want power. They don't want to be messed about. They want to be able to secure a good livelihood for their families and their communities. And 10 years on, if you ask the same people who voted Brexit, do you feel more empowered? Do you feel like you have a better quality of life? The answer is no. So I don't know why we're relitigating the EU when actually the question is about, do people feel empowered and feel like they've got access to life's basics?
My over the top is High Speed 2. I'm looking forward to talking to you about this because you're like engaged in politics, you're a climate campaigner. So I feel like we can really get nerdy and talk about this. So, High Speed 2 has been in the headlines this week because our current Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, has had to announce yet another inflation in costs and like yet another restriction in the route. So for those who don't know, High Speed 2 is a high-speed train line that was first agreed to in 2009, and it was meant to be a superfast train. We only have one superfast train currently. It's the Eurostar, but most kind of wealthy countries have a high-speed rail line, and the plan was build a line that gets you from London to Birmingham to Manchester super quickly. And the plan was we'll build this line, it'll cost like 38 billion pounds. It will take a few years to build, and then we'll have super fast rail. It'll be amazing. It'll unlock all these benefits, connect the country to each other, trains, brilliant, amazing. We have no high speed 2. It is 16 years late. The cost has ballooned from 37.5 billion to 103 billion pounds. So it's tripled in cost, and through successive political decisions, the line is now running London to Birmingham, which if you want to really get nerdy about high-speed rail, like it's technically not even high speed because for a train to go really fast, it has to cover a long distance, and London to Birmingham is not that far. So now we have this extremely expensive project that the Transport Secretary said will cost as much to cancel as it will to deliver. And this has rightly been getting headlines. It's a huge amount of money. It's an absolute orgy of waste. But there are a couple of things that the media coverage is missing that I really wanted to talk to you about, Fatima. So, like, number one, Heidi Alexander stood up in Parliament, straight faced, I get it, this is the game, and said, this is the Tories' fault. She sort of blamed successive governments. But, like, what I want us to be clear about is that this is a mess that all of the main parties are implicated in. It was a Labour government that greenlit this project, Andrew Adonis. The coalition government, so that's Tories and Lib Dems, agreed to keep going with it. Then when the Tories were in power, they saw the ballooning cost but said, we're going to keep doing it. And then Boris Johnson cancelled the leg to Leeds, Rishi Sunak cancelled the Manchester leg, and the current Labour government has inherited it. So every single political party that has been in government in the last couple of decades is implicated in this epic failure. And it is an epic failure. And I think the other thing I want to talk about is we're just used to bad headlines with High Speed 2. But this is also a huge failure of accountability. The way this project has been delivered was that we made a company called High Speed 2 Limited, which was meant to be, private sector company, get the job done, government can't deliver this stuff. And successive chief executives have made out absolute bandits. Like, we're talking multiple people, mostly men, there was one woman, who were earning more than the prime minister, like 600, 700K salaries, while the project cost ballooned, delivery wasn't met. Two of the chief execs got paid bonuses during this time. And there is a long list of companies that I will not go through who have got incredibly rich of this project. I think we should be talking about it, but I think we should be pointing the finger. Like, it's not enough just to say it's a failure. It's like, this is £100 billion failure, and money is not abundant in the public sector right now. So, like, who took it? And like, how are we going to get some of it back? So that's my over. Sorry, I went on a rant. I just feel very strongly about High Speed 2, Fatima.
I feel, I mean, you've pretty much said it all. So
Sorry, I've done too much.
no, standing ovation. I mean, there's a lot of things that confuse me about HS2. One, like the mammoth timeline, just describing essentially my entire childhood and adult life. That this train line has been being discussed. I actually remember the local protest against HS2 when I was at school. So, I mean, it's been a long, long time. There's a couple of things I want to talk about, and I actually know someone who's worked on HS2, and I think my
Ooh, give us the tea.
anger around it probably started when I kind of realized what a farce it was and how much people are being paid and the lack of accountability, like you say. And also just like, when did we accept that this project was just going to be to Birmingham? How much faster do we need to travel between Birmingham and London,
It's
right?
not that long a journey. Like,
It's
it's not
not
that long a
it's not
journey.
that long of a journey, which again I think comes back to this question of like, what is the transport infrastructure we need in this country? We need more regional connectivity, not just to London, but across regions. And we just need more rail capacity. I think the high speed thing for me is a question mark because we're not China. I understand why China needs high speed. The length and breadth of our country is 8 or 9 hours, right? So it's not the speed per se, it's the capacity and the number of trains that we can run reliably in the country. And I just, with the level of money that's gone into this project, we could have had more accessible, more affordable, and better connected bus services. We could have had more rail capacity. We could have, there's so many other things that we
I'm
could have done. And it's such a failure of a
I'm
project.
so glad you brought that up, Fatima, because the thing I want to really nerd out on is if you, I mean, there is no set of terms upon which this high speed rail project can succeed. But if you took the things that HS2 is meant to do, like connect the North to London, stimulate regional development, like you could have, for a fraction of the original price, you could have connected the North better to itself. So, like,
Absolutely.
anyone who's lived in like the Northwest and Northeast knows the trains are crap, loads of them aren't electrified. It's really hard to get between northern cities. And actually, if we want to go really deep, there is some evidence that just building like fancy high speed lines that connect people to the capital just increases brain drain. Like, that is what happened in France. It was really quick to get from Lyon to Paris. So even more people could like work in Paris and live in Lyon. So there's a question about whether High Speed 2 would have succeeded even if we built the line that we planned. But for a fraction of the price, we could have invested in regional development. Like, there's so much other stuff we could have done that would have been cheaper, but it wouldn't have been fancy, and politicians
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to cut a special ribbon and get a special company and award all these huge contracts. And yeah, it's kind of maddening. And I just like, I don't want to be out with the pitchforks, but like, given how much attention goes to like the too much money we're spending on welfare, given we've got a government that wasn't sure that pensioners should get like money off their winter fuel, and given people are permanently annoyed about like how much universal credit is and how dare you get child benefit for an extra child, like, can we be real about the numbers? We're going to drop 100 billion on a train that won't go very far and won't go very fast. Like, I care about the people who ran that company that burned my money in the street. You burned my money in the street and you got a bonus. Multiple chief executives of High Speed 2 got a bonus. And when the Public Accounts Committee, so it's like the group of MPs that look into public spending, interviewed the chair of HS2, he was like, yeah, we've really learned about that. So like next time the chief executive comes in, his pay is going to be tied to like delivering stuff on time and on budget. So 10 years into this project, the chief exec's pay wasn't tied to delivering the project on time and on budget. I just want some people to be hauled over the coals. I want some people to be accountable. I want some money to be clawed back. Like,
And we want more anger a bit, actually, like people to be
yeah.
infuriated about this. And the 21st century, when we need infrastructure that's fit for purpose and we need delivery now, why are governments not able to deliver infrastructure projects on a timely and sort of budgeted time. Yeah,
Yeah, and
way.
also, like, we need I don't know whether we count high-speed rail, high-speed tours, but also we need low carbon forms of transport. It's way cheaper and way quicker to fly to Edinburgh. As you say, if there's a case for high-speed rail, it's to, like, cut the cost and length of those journeys as compared to flying. So, yeah, it feels like a loss for everyone. Haven't even got into the Bat Tunnel that was built for £100 million, which it's a longer conversation. The short version is no, £100 million was spent on a weird tunnel to protect bats, even though it's not clear that the high-speed rail line would have disrupted the bats' habitat and that the nature charities involved have said we didn't ask for the £100 million bat tunnel. So it's an orgy of waste and nonsense.
So my under the radar is a climate story, which is always underreported, but this is a particular one around climate adaptation and the fact that Britain is already living through climate impacts and that our infrastructure, housing, and workplaces are not fit for purpose. So today, there was a report around government advisors warning the government that the UK needs maximum temperature protections in workplaces so that workers, when we're going through extreme heat waves, are able to kind of not work or be protected and have adaptation mechanisms in place in their workplace. And this should be a major story, but these like climate adaptation stories only pop up seasonally, right? But every year we're experiencing unprecedented heat waves or extremely wet winters. Like this is the norm. We no longer live in a temperate country, and our infrastructure was set up for an entirely different, like temperature limits and seasons. And so there's so many elements to this. One, which is like we talk about mitigation and stopping the worst impacts of the climate crisis, but we also need to think about how, as a country, we adapt to the impacts that are already here. Two, how do we make sure we think about inequality as we're doing it? Like the solution can't be people just buy air conditioning. Air conditioning actually drives up the temperature in cities if everyone gets it. But two, only those who can afford it will adapt. And so the best ways to adapt is like more tree coverage, making sure that there's cooling zones, that like our homes are properly insulated. We've got some of the oldest housing stock that is like poorly insulated, is very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. Those are the ways in which we can make sure that we're sort of adapted to what is now becoming the new normal.
It's an absolute great under the radar. I hadn't heard about it until you sent me the article. I didn't know that thing about air conditioning though. Explain that one. So if we've all got AC units, it gets hotter.
It gets hotter both because we're driving up electricity usage if we're all kind of using these air conditions. But in terms of the hot air it's spitting out into cities, 1 or 2 degrees can kind of drive up temperatures in cities where there is lots of AC coverage. I'm not saying that we shouldn't get AC. Definitely in public spaces, we're going to need, and in workplaces, we're going to need AC. But in the same way that electric vehicles are not the solution for everybody, AC can't be the single solution that we use to adapt to hotter temperatures.
Yeah, and I mean, I have friends who are teachers, and like, I think at points it was like schools were like uninhabitable last summer. So,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's not no AC, but it's, yeah, who needs the AC? If the media were taking this seriously, like, what kind of coverage would you like to see? And like, what is the conversation we need to be having?
The conversation we need to be having is that climate change is a public health, a workers' rights, an infrastructure and inequality problem, and that we need to be thinking about how it impacts society at large. It's not just abstract temperature limits. It makes it more difficult for people to work. It impacts our health because those who are already either elderly or very young or have other health issues are going to be impacted by warmer temperatures or colder temperatures. And so we need a public health response. We need to think about infrastructure and how we're building our communities and how we are ensuring there are more green spaces and how we are making sure our public services in places like school and care homes and hospitals are fit for purpose and able to kind of keep the people that they're serving healthy and within safe limits in terms of temperatures. And so that's the level, like the nuance of the story that we need it to be. It can't be flashpoints of like, oh, it's going to be 31 degrees next week or 38 degrees this summer. And it can't just be these flash in the pan observational stories.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, I think the housing stock one's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because as you say, our homes are incredibly poorly insulated, which means we suffer in the winter and the summer. It's like
Yeah,
some of the worst, I think, in Europe. Like fixing that problem, if we did fix it, would, I guess, is a great example of Green New Deal in action, right? It's like it
absolutely.
would create jobs.
Yeah.
It would reduce energy bills. Like, it's just an obvious win. Like, why doesn't it
Yeah.
happen?
I mean, that's maybe the underreported story, which is insulation, right? Like when we're thinking about the war in Iran and the energy prices going up, the single biggest solution people should be talking about is insulation. If we require less energy, it will cost less, right? Yes, we need energy prices to come down, but we can also reduce our usage if our homes are better insulated. It also allows us to deal with summer. There is, cold homes has become politicized over the last few years. So we talk about excess deaths in the winter, people who are dying literally because of cold homes. My hope is it will also become a political issue, the number of people that are dying because of overheated homes, because that is happening. It's having such a massive impact, but again, is like such a side story.
Huge thank you to Grania, who became a paying Patreon supporter this week. Right now, global media is almost entirely controlled by the ultra wealthy. You and I both know we are better off without a small group of billionaires shaping the news agenda and influencing public opinion. But that's the reality right now. That's why we need your help. By supporting Over the Top Under the Radar, you help to fund independent left-wing media not beholden to the whims of shareholders. This podcast only exists because 350 people choose to pay for it each month. Right now, that only covers basic production costs. We need more supporters so the podcast can continue to exist and to grow. Imagine what we could do if another 100 people decided to join. Not only will your support help us grow the podcast, you'll get access to exclusive content. If you're enjoying my conversation with Fatima, we're currently making a bonus episode, which will go out on Monday after the show is released. There's a behind-the-scenes newsletter and our over-the-top, under-the-radar WhatsApp community. It's really lively. There's loads of conversation between shows and people are always sharing other stories that got missed or covered too much. So if you go to patreon.com/over-the-top, under-the-radar, you can sign up today. My under the radar is a man called Christopher Harborne. If his name sounds familiar, it's probably because he is the guy who's been writing these huge checks to Reform UK, and we found out recently a personal check of £5 million to Nigel Farage, which is currently being investigated. So Christopher Harborne has made his debut on the Sunday Times Rich List. Christopher Harborne, the Sunday Times have estimated the best they can with their investigative journalism is worth £18.2 billion. He has lived in Thailand for nearly 30 years. He lives on Koh Samui, if people are interested. And the Sunday Times were pretty clear in their profile of him that it's actually quite hard to identify Christopher Harborne's wealth because he's got stakes in lots of different companies and lots of them don't have a lot of reporting requirements. So they've kind of done the best they can to estimate his wealth with the information they have. I wanted to talk about Christopher Harborne because it's kind of hard to stress like the amount of money he's given to Reform. So we know he's given £12 million like in the last year. He made a record breaking £9 million donation Q3 of last year. He topped that up with like another 3 million in Q4. So he has single-handedly transformed political fundraising in the UK. Reform UK are playing at a different level to any political party, including the Tories, in terms of the amount of money they have. It shows in terms of how slick their communications are. I've written about like what it's like going to a Reform UK event. Like these people have shmoney, and a lot of that is because of Christopher Harborne. And I say at least 12 million because we've just learned he's given 5 million to Nigel Farage for his personal security, whatever that means. It's very interesting that one of the most important people in British politics doesn't live in the UK. We know very little about him. He constantly gets called a crypto billionaire, which I'm kind of interesting because a lot of the money he made, he didn't make his money in crypto. So I don't know if it's because his investments are in crypto, but like this guy has a direct line to the person that thinks he'll be the next prime minister. And if the opinion polls is right, will be. And I guess the other thing I want to say about Christopher Harbour, and I'd love to know kind of what you think about him and your take on him, is that for someone who's backing this like insurgent political party that's not about business as usual, it's got a really fascinating biography because he went to Westminster School, a very fancy private school. He went to Downing College, Cambridge, a very fancy university, and he worked at McKinsey, a management consultant that, you know, does lots of public sector outsourcing and lots of other things. So he came from what it seems like a fairly privileged background. He went to like lots of elite institutions, and then he got a stake in like a defense company that kind of spun off from the MOD, so like gets lots of contracts. He's involved in like a money transfer operation that kind of like offers payment services to wealthy individuals. He's involved in like an aviation thing that again I think is about like sort of private jets for rich people. So like he's very much not really a man of the people, I would say, based on his kind of lifestyle and bio, but he's backing this party that is apparently for working class people. Yeah, and I just that was interesting, and I wonder why we aren't talking more about it. What do you think about Chris, my mate Chris, Christopher Harborne?
I mean, in some ways, it's not a surprise because it's just an extension of what we know about reform, right? It's a bunch of overly privileged, billionaire-backed folks who want to feel like, or at least communicate that they're insurgents for the working class. I thought actually one of the not funniest stories, but like images in my mind was around when Nigel Farage was pitching to Chris around his ambitions post Brexit, and essentially it was very much White Lotus. They were at one of his really fancy retreats or hotels in Thailand, and they were on the beach. And
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
and British politics is being defined and funded from that and from there. And I'm like, that is problematic and something
Oh
we're
my God, you're
used to
right. It's
seeing in the
so
US.
giving like White Lotus. I love it. You're right. Anyone who hasn't seen the latest season of White Lotus, another reason to watch it. Oh my God, I hadn't even. That is wild.
And it's something I think as Brits we're used to seeing or observing in the US and almost have a bit of like superiority. Well, there isn't as much money in play in our politics, and we've got regulations and rules, and there aren't kind of PACs that are backing candidates and outspending. But this is a move into that. In many ways, reform is moving us into an American style politics. And I think the bit that also is a bit concerning to me is one, this is someone who doesn't live in the UK. We have no sight of how they're making their money and who could be funneling money through them to influence British politics. But three, reform is kind of building a cadre of billionaires and supporters who come from like a new type of wealth. So the crypto wealth, the tech libertarians, the anti-regulation politics that we're seeing in the US, like the folks who back ChatGPT or new technology. And, you know, something was reported that was really interesting about why Chris is supporting reform and what he's interested in. And Nigel Farage at first was saying, oh, this is just for my personal security to make sure I don't need anything. And then it was to reward him for Brexit. Why are you being rewarded? Who are you working for? And then there was something else reported about Chris's main interest is in making sure that we're making the best use of our post-Brexit landscape and new technologies. What new technologies?
Could it
And
be
so there is an
crypto?
interest. I mean, I think it could be crypto, but nonetheless, over time, we're seeing that he does have an interest, that this money is buying him something potentially, and that's alarming.
I mean, you're right. Like the truth is, we have been very lucky and blessed that we don't have a political system that is like as dictated by money as the US is. And I think you're right. We shouldn't be complacent about that. But it just doesn't pass any sniff test in the world to say that this man, I mean, billionaires are not notoriously generous people, that this man who has like a huge amount of wealth has given that we know of 17 million pounds to either the leader of Reform or Reform UK, that he doesn't want something for his money. Like
Yeah.
that isn't realistic. And the truth is, even if nothing has been promised, like, and we saw this with some of the Labour scandals when Keir Starmer came in, and the free glasses and the Downing Street pass for like a
Absolutely.
big donor. It's like, at the very least, that money means that Reform will always pick up the phone to him. Does it mean they'll do everything that he wants? Like, I would argue like he's bought himself a pretty good seat at the table, but like regardless, it's like this is a guy who will potentially have like a direct line to the next prime minister of the UK, and like that's not okay. I mean, we have recently seen the government have brought in some restrictions on foreign donations. So now,
Yeah.
if you want to give more than £100,000, which is still quite a lot of money, to a UK political party, you need to be based in the UK. I mean, Christopher Harborne said he's going to challenge that in court. I mean, he's also said if not, he would, potentially relocate to the UK. That's like that isn't okay. No one should be allowed to buy such a big stake in our political system. And like, the crypto thing's interesting. I interviewed some people from Reform for a piece that I wrote. And one of the pushbacks that they gave when I was asking about the money that they had raised, he was like, oh, he's not a crypto billionaire. He made his money in aviation. So I'm sort of intrigued as to like when someone's a crypto billionaire and when someone isn't. He definitely has a ton of money in crypto and is making money from crypto. And again, like, is it a coincidence that Nigel Farage was at a cryptocurrency conference last year on the main stage saying he advised everyone to have crypto as part of their portfolio? Like, I mean, I think the crypto bros, US, UK, everywhere, like they're pretty clear about what they're buying. Like, I don't think they're there's not much like complexity or artifice in that. They're like, we're buying a stake in this political system, like regulation, politics, politicians have a huge amount of power on like what crypto is, how it can be used. And they're like, yeah, we're going to just like use the money we've made to make sure that we get the things that mean we can keep making more money from this currency. It's like, yeah, it just feels like a pretty open and shut case that this guy's buying influence. And yeah, I think we should be worried about, like, I almost think like, could we be talking about Christopher Harborne enough? Like, who is as significant in like British politics right now? Especially when you look at, I talked a bit about those full-page ads that Reform UK took out for the local elections. They kind of got around spending rules on that because there's a cap on what you can spend in every constituency, but that ad spend didn't really count. That's before we get into like what they're doing digitally, which we probably don't even have half the picture on. So like this man is like pumping money into our political system despite not living here. And like bankrolling this new political party that has some really scary policies and that is like primed to come into Downing Street in the next 3 years. And yeah, I just think like an item on the Sunday Times rich list and the occasional, expose in the Guardian is like not enough. And that any investigative journalist listening, like anyone, like we need to be digging more into him and like understanding like what he stands for, what he's doing, all of that stuff. So that's my Christopher is my under the radar. Well, thank you so much. You've been a brilliant co-host. Where can people find you and your work?
So look up Green New Deal Rising. We've got a website, we've got socials. You'll find me on those socials, and we'll have some exciting work keeping this government accountable, but also electing a new wave of champions.
Awesome, because they are still the government, whatever you read in the papers.